I'll never forget the way my stepmother's voice cut through the air like a blade that day. Sharp, cold, and calculated. She stood in the middle of our grand dining room, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she paced back and forth, clutching a stack of papers that felt heavier than bricks to me. I was barely 22, still reeling from the loss of my father just weeks earlier, a man who had always been my anchor, my protector.
But now?
Now I was drowning. "You're just a nobody," she spat, her lips curling into something between a sneer and a smirk. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, leaving me breathless and disoriented. "Do you really think you deserve any part of this? This estate belongs to us. To people who matter." Her eyes locked onto mine, icy blue daggers piercing straight through me. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. The venom in her tone, the deliberate pause before each word, the way her perfectly manicured nails tapped rhythmically on the document she held. Every movement screamed control, power, domination. I wanted to scream back, to tell her she was wrong, that I wasn't some insignificant pawn in her twisted game. But instead, all I could do was stand there, frozen, my hands trembling at my sides. My chest tightened, making it hard to breathe. Was this really happening? Was she seriously trying to erase me from everything my father had built? And then came the laughter. Not loud or boisterous, but low and cruel, echoing off the high ceilings of the room. It sent chills down my spine. Beside her, my stepsister crossed her arms and leaned casually against the wall, her expression smug, almost bored. They were a united front, two predators circling their prey.
Me.
"Face it," my stepmother continued, her voice dripping with disdain. "Your father left you nothing because he knew you'd squander it. You're weak, unworthy, and frankly, no one here will miss you when you're gone."
Gone.
The word hung in the air like smoke after a fire, thick, suffocating, impossible to ignore. Gone where? Out of their lives? Out of existence altogether? For a moment, I thought I might collapse right there under the weight of her cruelty. But something inside me snapped awake, a flicker of defiance sparking deep within my chest. This wasn't over. Not yet. The next morning, I sat slumped in an oversized leather chair in the lawyer's office, staring blankly at the mahogany desk in front of me. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and stale coffee, a scent that only added to the nausea swirling in my stomach. Across from me, my stepmother sat poised and composed, her designer suit pressed to perfection, while my stepsister scrolled mindlessly on her phone, completely unbothered by the gravity of the situation. When the lawyer finally entered, his demeanor was calm, professional, but there was something about the way he avoided meeting my eyes that made my skin crawl. He shuffled through a stack of papers before clearing his throat and beginning to speak. "As per the late Mr. Thompson's will," he began, his voice steady but devoid of warmth, "the entirety of the estate, including properties, investments, and liquid assets, has been bequeathed to Mrs. Evelyn Thompson and her daughter, Miss Clara Thompson." My heart stopped. Literally stopped. For a second, I couldn't hear anything except the blood rushing in my ears. I blinked rapidly, certain I'd misheard him. But the look on Evelyn's face confirmed it. Triumph. Pure, unadulterated triumph.
What?
I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. That can't be right. Dad loved me."
He wouldn't.
"Oh, darling," Evelyn interrupted, her tone dripping with mock sympathy. She leaned forward slightly, her lips curving into a patronizing smile. "He did love you in his own way. But let's not kid ourselves. You've always been more of a burden than a blessing. All those years of private school, tutors, therapy sessions," she waved her hand dismissively, as if ticking off expenses on an imaginary list. "Frankly, we've already given you far more than you deserved." Clara snickered beside her, finally looking up from her phone long enough to shoot me a condescending glance. "Yeah, maybe now you'll stop mooching off us and figure out how to support yourself for once." My jaw clenched so tightly I thought my teeth might crack.
How dare they?
How dare they sit there, gloating over something that wasn't even theirs to begin with? My father had worked tirelessly to build this empire, not them. And yet, Here they were, acting like they owned every last piece of it. But the worst part? The absolute worst part was knowing they weren't done. This wasn't just about money or property. It was about erasing me entirely. Stripping away my identity, my place in the family, my very sense of self-worth. As the lawyer droned on, explaining the legalities of the transfer, I felt myself shrinking smaller and smaller in that chair. Invisible, worthless. A ghost haunting the edges of a life I no longer belonged to. And then, without warning, something shifted inside me. It started as a tiny spark, a flicker of anger buried beneath layers of grief and betrayal. But the more Evelyn spoke, the more Clara smirked, the brighter that spark grew until it became a roaring flame.
No.
This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because if they thought they could take everything from me, they were dead wrong. That night, alone in the small apartment I'd rented after being forced out of the family home, I stared at the cracked ceiling tiles and replayed the events of the day over and over in my head. Each memory felt like a fresh wound, raw and bleeding. The humiliation of sitting silently while Evelyn dismantled my entire life. The sting of Clara's cutting remarks. The crushing realization that the people I'd trusted most had betrayed me in the worst possible way. But beneath the pain, something else stirred. A quiet, simmering rage. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd reduced me to nothing. But what they didn't realize was that sometimes hitting rock bottom is exactly what you need to find your footing again. I grabbed my laptop and opened a search engine, typing furiously, "How to contest a will." The screen lit up with articles, forums, and legal advice. My fingers trembled as I scrolled, absorbing every word. Contesting a will wasn't easy. It required proof of undue influence, fraud, or incompetence. But as I read further, one phrase caught my attention. Hidden beneficiaries. Hidden beneficiaries. Could it be possible? My father had always been meticulous, almost obsessive, about planning for the future. He kept detailed records, documented every decision. If there was even a chance he'd left something behind, a loophole, a secret clause, I owed it to myself to find it. The next morning, I showed up at the law firm handling my father's estate, armed with determination and a carefully rehearsed excuse. "I'm here to collect some personal belongings my father left behind," I told the receptionist, forcing a polite smile. "Just a few keepsakes." She hesitated, eyeing me skeptically. "I'll need to confirm with Mr. Harris first." Mr. Harris, the same lawyer who delivered the devastating news days earlier. While she disappeared into his office, I took a deep breath, steadying myself. This was risky. One wrong move, and they'd shut me out completely. When the receptionist returned, she nodded curtly. "You can go in, but don't touch anything outside the box marked personal items." Inside the storage room, my pulse quickened as I rifled through dusty boxes labeled with dates and vague descriptions. Old tax returns, property deeds, insurance policies, all relics of a life meticulously documented. And then, tucked away in the corner of one box, I found it, a worn leather-bound journal with my father's initials embossed on the cover. My hands shook as I flipped it open. The pages were filled with his familiar scrawl, notes, reminders, sketches of ideas. But near the back, I discovered something extraordinary, a handwritten amendment to his will. In the event of my passing, it read, "I hereby designate my daughter, Emily Thompson, as the sole beneficiary of 40% of my estate, to be held in trust until such time as she demonstrates financial independence and maturity." Tears blurred my vision as I read the words again and again. He hadn't forgotten me. He hadn't abandoned me. He'd protected me, in his own way. Clutching the journal to my chest, I slipped out of the office unnoticed. For the first time since his death, I felt alive. Hope surged through me, sharp and electric. This was my weapon, my leverage, my chance to fight back. Evelyn and Clara thought they'd taken everything from me, but they had no idea what I was capable of. For days after finding the journal, I couldn't shake the gnawing uncertainty clawing at the edges of my mind. Yes, I had evidence, a tangible, undeniable piece of my father's intentions, but would it be enough? Would anyone believe me? The doubts whispered incessantly, feeding on my insecurities like parasites. What if the journal wasn't legally binding? What if Evelyn and her team of lawyers tore it apart, dismissed it as irrelevant or invalid? Worse still, what if they accused me of forging it? The thought alone made my stomach churn. I imagined standing in court, my credibility shredded, my reputation dragged through the mud. Then there was the emotional toll. Every time I looked at the journal, I saw my father's handwriting, his careful loops and precise lines, and it felt like reopening a wound that would never fully heal. His words were meant to protect me, yes, but they also served as a painful reminder of everything I'd lost, of the gaping void he'd left behind. One evening, as I sat cross-legged on my bed surrounded by legal documents and highlighted notes, I broke down. Tears streamed down my face as I clutched the journal to my chest, sobbing uncontrollably. "Why did you leave me like this?" I whispered into the empty room. "Why didn't you prepare me for this?" But even in my darkest moments, something inside me refused to give up. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was desperation. Or maybe it was the faint hope that justice existed somewhere, waiting to be claimed. Whatever it was, it kept me moving forward. The next day, I reached out to an old acquaintance, a former classmate named Daniel who now worked as a paralegal. We'd never been close, but he'd always struck me as kind and trustworthy. Over coffee at a bustling cafe, I laid out my situation, showing him the journal and explaining everything. "This is solid," he said after examining it closely, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Handwritten amendments can hold up in court if they meet certain criteria. But you'll need more than just this. Bank statements, emails, anything that shows your dad's intent." His words reignited a flicker of hope, but they also underscored the enormity of the task ahead. Gathering evidence wouldn't be easy, not when Evelyn controlled access to most of my father's records. Still, I resolved to try. That night, unable to sleep, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. There was one of my father and me at his birthday dinner last year, laughing over dessert. Another of us hiking together, his arms slung casually around my shoulders. Each image carried its own bittersweet ache, reminding me of happier times and fueling my resolve. "He believed in me," I murmured aloud, tracing the screen with my fingertip. "And I won't let her take that away." With renewed determination, I drafted a plan. First, I'd gather every scrap of evidence I could find. Then, I'd consult a lawyer, one who specialized in contested estates. And finally, I'd confront Evelyn head-on. The road ahead was fraught with obstacles, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had a direction. A purpose. Even if it killed me, I was going to see this through. The courtroom was eerily silent as I took my seat, the weight of anticipation pressing down on me like a physical force. My heart pounded so loudly, I was sure everyone could hear it. Across the aisle, Evelyn sat flanked by her team of polished attorneys, her posture rigid and imperious. Clara lounged beside her, scrolling lazily on her phone, seemingly oblivious to the gravity of the moment. Their confidence radiated off them, a stark contrast to the knot of anxiety twisting in my stomach. When the judge entered, the room fell into a hush. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white, as the proceedings began. The opposing counsel launched into their argument, presenting a narrative that painted me as entitled and desperate, an opportunistic child trying to claim what wasn't hers. Evelyn nodded along subtly, her expression smug, as though victory were already assured. But then it was my turn. Standing up, I felt every pair of eyes in the room fixate on me. My lawyer handed me the journal, its leather cover worn and familiar beneath my fingertips. Taking a deep breath, I approached the bench, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Your Honor," I began, holding the journal aloft, "this document contains a handwritten amendment to my father's will. It explicitly designates me as the beneficiary of 40% of his estate, contingent upon demonstrating financial independence and maturity." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Evelyn stiffened visibly, her mask of composure slipping for the first time. Clara glanced up from her phone, her brows furrowing in confusion. This isn't admissible. Evelyn's lawyer interjected sharply, rising to his feet. There's no way to verify its authenticity. That's where you're wrong, my attorney countered smoothly, producing a folder of supporting documents. We have bank statements showing funds set aside specifically for Emily, correspondence between Mr. Thompson and his financial advisors discussing these arrangements, and even witness testimony confirming his intentions. As each piece of evidence was presented, Evelyn's facade crumbled further. Her hands clenched into fists on the table, her jaw tightening with every revelation. Clara shifted uncomfortably beside her, glancing at her mother with growing unease. Finally, the judge addressed Evelyn directly. Mrs. Thompson, is there any reason why these documents should not be considered valid representations of your late husband's wishes? Evelyn hesitated, her usual poise shattered. For a fleeting moment, she looked lost, uncertain. Then, with visible effort, she composed herself and replied, No, Your Honor. The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. Minutes later, the verdict came down. The amendment was legitimate. I was officially recognized as a beneficiary of my father's estate. Evelyn collapsed into her chair, her face pale and stricken. Clara stared at her mother in disbelief, her earlier arrogance replaced by shock. As the gavel struck, sealing the decision, Evelyn let out a strangled cry and sank to her knees, her empire crumbling around her. Justice had been served, but the real battle was only beginning. In the weeks that followed the trial, I found myself grappling with emotions I hadn't anticipated. Relief washed over me in waves, but it was accompanied by an unexpected emptiness. Winning back my rightful inheritance didn't magically erase the scars Evelyn and Clara had inflicted, or the years of feeling unworthy and invisible. Yet, amidst the chaos of rebuilding my life, something remarkable began to emerge, a sense of purpose stronger than anything I'd ever known. I decided to use my share of the estate not just for myself, but to create opportunities for others who had been marginalized or overlooked. Inspired by my own struggles, I founded a nonprofit organization aimed at empowering young women navigating familial betrayal and financial instability. The program offered mentorship, legal resources, and scholarships, tools I wished I'd had during my darkest days. Watching participants grow in confidence and resilience reminded me daily of why I'd fought so hard. Reconnecting with old friends became another cornerstone of my healing journey. Many had distanced themselves during the turmoil, unsure how to navigate my complicated family drama. But as news of the trial spread, they reached out, offering apologies and support. Their kindness reinforced the importance of genuine relationships over superficial alliances. Still, forgiveness remained elusive. Evelyn and Clara? They faded from my life almost entirely after the trial. Rumors circulated about their financial struggles and strained relationship, but I chose not to dwell on their downfall. Instead, I focused on building a future untethered from their toxicity. One evening, standing on the balcony of my new apartment overlooking the city skyline, I reflected on how far I'd come. The girl who once doubted her worth now stood tall, unshaken by the storms that once threatened to consume her. I'm not a nobody, I whispered to the night sky, a smile tugging at my lips. And I never was. This wasn't just survival, it was triumph.